Welcome back to Software Without Borders, where we explore the ever-evolving world of software and its impact on businesses and industries worldwide. I'm your co-host, Andy Hilliard, CEO of Accelerance, and with me today is my co-host, Olivier Poulard, Managing Director of Software Strategies at Accelerance.
Thank you, Andy. And today we're thrilled to have Tom Holt join us. Tom is a seasoned software executive and process consultant with a very deep understanding of agile frameworks and also vast experience in agile transformation and remote team optimization. Tom is passionate about scaling software development processes, fostering collaboration in distributed teams, and driving continuous improvement.
Tom, we're excited to hear your insights on navigating the challenges of modern software development. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. Thanks, Tom. So just to begin, you highlight a strong focus on agile transformation and remote team optimization. Can you share a little bit about your journey into software leadership and process consulting, and sort of what led you to specialize in these areas?
Absolutely. Well, I started off as a developer. Been doing development for 30 plus years. Actually, first program I wrote was probably 40 plus years ago. And a few years back, I got promoted into management. And I think at that time, it's not maybe a little bit more than 15 years ago, the first job that I had as a manager was managing a remote team. It was a new thing for the organization I was working at. It was a new thing for me, obviously. And so from that point, I had to learn a lot of things really quickly. And I'll say back in those days, the tools were not anywhere near what they are now. We were on conference calls. We couldn't see each other. And so there were a lot of different things different techniques we used back then that we have better tools for now. And then as I got into that role and, as I progressed into other roles with more responsibility, I started to look for a way to manage the team in a way that really used all the skills and abilities that the team had. So I was formerly trained in PMI methods and waterfall methods, and I did not see the same emphasis on using the innate intelligence that software developers typically have. And so that's why I was really, really interested when I started running into agile techniques and agile methodologies to use those. And I just found that they've been much, much more effective in not only using the whole brain of the team, but also being more predictable as to when things would be done, to create higher quality things, and also to create solutions for the user that are closer to what the user actually needs, rather than a top-down design that may not actually satisfy what the user wants.
So you and I have known each other approximately 12 years now. I think we started engaging when you were at Bullhorn, and you've worked across various industries, right? From manufacturing and marketing and healthcare. Can you describe a little bit about how these industries, in their own unique way, shaped your perspective on software development, leadership, and processes?
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting. Because in those three, the three things you mentioned, manufacturing, healthcare, and then digital marketing, the things that I've been doing, they're all very, very different in the sense of what's the cost to deliver a new version? Okay. So if you think about it in manufacturing, I started off my career making engine controls for diesel engines. And so once that engine control went out, it was done, right? It had to be complete at that time. And we could reprogram them, but you'd have to get a truck to come into a particular place. I mean, it's big trouble to do that. And you didn't want to have any bugs as you went out. So that was one end of the spectrum. And the other end of the spectrum is a modern SaaS program where we can update potentially, I mean, there are some companies doing this multiple times a day. You can make changes to the software that are live very, very quickly. And so the cost of making that change is very, very low. And so that's probably the biggest difference between those industries. Now, of course, what does the user need, or what is of value to them? What problems are we trying to solve for them? Very, very much, right? In engine controls, we were looking for efficiency with a very baseline of absolutely zero defects, right? We were trying to make the engines more efficient, and that was the big impetus there. In SaaS, we've got whole different kinds of problems in email marketing and in healthcare. Once again, whole different sets of problems. But those things, I think that the similarities, once we get past those particular problems, the similarities between what the developers are actually doing are greater than the differences. The real difference is in how long it takes to deliver a new version.
Okay. All right. And what have you seen as far as, key challenges or differences when scaling software development, but at the same time maintaining a focus on customer value and predictability? How do you balance those two?
Well, okay. So when it comes to scaling, the biggest thing to think about when scaling is what I call lines of communication. So if you think about a team of one, right? There are no lines of communication. That person communicates with themselves like it's all internal to their heads, very, very fast, right? When you have two people, now you have one line of communication between those two people. And when you get three, now you have three lines. When you get four, now you have 6 lines of communication. By the time you get to 20 people, you have 190 lines of communication. And it's actually, if you look at the math to it, it's an order of squared. It's not exactly squared. It's a little different, but it's on that order. So every person you add to this increases the number of lines of communication by the number of people that were already in the system to begin with. So what does that mean? Well, when you think about Conway's Law, right? Software researcher many years ago who looked at organizations and realized that the organizations were creating software that mimicked the organizational structure that they were working in. And I think since then, we've realized that we need to flip that on its head. And we need to create an organizational structure within the software development team, department, whatever it is, that mirrors the architectural structure that we want to have. And we want to minimize. So in that architectural structure, if you think about multiple components, you want those components to be loosely coupled. You want them to communicate on a very defined set of APIs, for example. Similarly, within a scaling organization, you want teams to be as autonomous as possible. You don't want them to have to stop and when they hit a decision point and go ask someone else or go communicate with someone else. So you create cross-functional teams that have everything within them, or almost everything within them, that they need in order to produce the piece of functionality that they are tasked with producing. And so as you go from, one team, one pizza team, scrum team, whatever you want to call it, to 2, you want to make sure that those teams aren't blocked by the other. And the way that you do that is by organizing the work so that the communication that they have to have is minimized.
Am I maybe the only person listening or speaking today that wasn't familiar with Conway's Law? I may be exposing a little bit of ignorance. Yeah, thank you. I figured it was a loaded question. I deserve that.
I do a lot of study, so.
Yeah, but it's for everything, minimizing, simplifying and minimizing, your organization will, essentially optimize your delivery. That's really what it boils down to. So, and I love the way you have a practical way of approaching things, Tom. And to me, your expertise in agile and like lean and less Nexus, etc. I mean, it's just amazing the breadth of experience that you have with Agile. How do these frameworks differ in their approach to scaling Agile? That's the key here. And then what factors do you consider when choosing the right framework for a specific organization?
So, well, I'll put it this way: I'm not a slave or a fanboy of any particular framework. If I were going to go into an organization and do an agile transformation, I would probably start with Scrum, only because it's very simple and lightweight. It's easy to understand, and most people within software development that I've run into have at least some familiarity with the pieces of it, with how it kind of works. Right? They may not understand all of it, but they've had some exposure to it, and so that makes it a good first introduction to agile methodologies. Now, going on from there, you mentioned Lean, you didn't mention Kanban. Kanban's one of them. Less, Nexus, Safe, I mentioned earlier. There are a lot of good things in each one of those. Once again, I look at it as more of a smorgasbord, and I will pick things out of those that solve particular problems for that team. So I think this is one of the reasons why you want a consultant to come in versus just you go read the Scrum book or the Less book or whatever, because you want somebody that's had some experiences with these things and understands what they actually do and how they work in practice. Because I can go and I can read the Scrum guide, and if I've never had any experience with it, I can implement, so I think, the things that it's asking me to do. But if I don't know the theory behind why those things are part of it, and if I don't know what the pitfalls to, because every process has potential downsides to it, if I don't know what the potential downsides are to that, I will be blindsided by them. So anyway, that's kind of my answer to that, which is like, it's not necessarily, as cookie cutter as I would like for it to be. I think everyone else would like for it to be, is to say, oh yeah, just pick this one if your organization looks like this. I don't think there's a good answer like that.
Yeah, every time I've seen, people, taking a book and applying the book, they failed every single time because they don't take into account the dynamic of the team, how distributed or not it is, how big or small it is, etc. And then the technology and the industry, for instance. So on the industry side, I know that you have a wide range of experience with industries and like digital marketing to healthcare and manufacturing. How do you tailor your consulting approach, since you were talking about consulting earlier, to address the unique challenges and requirements of each industry?
Well, once again, I think a lot of that comes in the discovery as you go in and you understand, like, and the industry is interesting, but really what's really interesting is the pain points of this particular team or this particular department or this particular organization. What things are not working the way they want? People have a consultant come in because something's not as good as they want it to be, right? Very infrequently, they think everything's great and it could just be a little bit better. But usually it's because something's not going right and they want to fix it. And so seeing what the problems are that they're dealing with and understanding then the root cause of those. So you can go to, there's a lot of techniques to do that. But the best one is just listening to people and understanding where their pain is. And then based on experience, understanding what the root causes of those things are, and then applying a set of tools that will help them with that problem. So I don't know if that answers your question exactly.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
That's kind of my technique.
No, absolutely. And then, let's on the practical side, any good or successful agile transformation you want to share with us?
Oh gosh, there's been a few, but I think that my favorite one is one of the first ones. I came into an organization that had a leadership vacuum in it, and at that time they had a ad hoc process where, or as I like to call them, an organic process, one that's grown up over time, where various stakeholders within the organization would just come to the developers and ask for things to be done. And so this caused an incredible amount of stress within the development team because people weren't sure what the prioritization was. They weren't sure how they were supposed to balance what should be done versus what not be done and when things should be done. And so, like I said earlier, the first thing I did is I came in and instituted Scrum. And I did it. At that point, we had a co-located team. So I actually set up a physical Kanban board, a real life big whiteboard with magnets on it, and we stuck the cards up there. Obviously, these days, I've worked with a lot of distributed teams, so that's not a possibility. And there's a lot of advantages to using electronic tools. But this was really nice because it gave them a very very tangible way of seeing the work. And the great thing about it was, and this is a good thing with the electronic tools as well, is it was an information radiator. So not only did the team come and they could see that board and see what the work was and what the progress was and how things were going, but anybody within the company could walk by that board and see what was being worked on and what the priorities were going forward. What were the next things that were going to be worked on? And if they had a problem with that, if a stakeholder had a problem with that, then they could go to the person that managed those priorities. One person manages those priorities and say, hey, my thing was number 3 on the list. I think it should be number 1. They could have that discussion, but they didn't have to have it with the team, and the team didn't have to deal with that stress. And that cleaned up that whole team's. I could talk for a little while about the dysfunction that was happening in that team and the stress and the just toxicity that was happening when I first got there, and how much better it was once everybody knew kind of what the priorities were and how things were flowing. It was so much better.
Yeah, it's amazing how a difference you can make, by just aligning everybody on the ways of working, but also on the mindset, right? So
yeah, absolutely.
I think that's the key. Yeah.
Hey, Tom, software development methodologies and technologies and tools are always evolving like everything else, right? So, how do you leverage your experience and knowledge, yet at the same time sort of sharpen the saw and stay on top of this evolution, stay on the leading edge of this evolution of these methodologies and technologies and tools? What are you doing to stay ahead of things and integrate them into your consulting practice?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think the funnest thing about consulting is that that there's one way that you get to learn that's different from if you're a regular employee, which is you're constantly being exposed to different environments where people have different problems. And so you're learning from them because you have to solve those problems. But on top of that, I'm a voracious reader. And I follow, there's a bunch of podcasts that I follow as well.
Do you have any names?
I just like this. Agile Toolkit's a good one. Okay. Vasco Duarte's, which I forget what the name of that is right at the moment. Gosh, I'll have a couple more. Maybe we can throw them in the show notes.
Sure.
The Agile Within, I was just on that like a couple of weeks back, and that's a really good one. I really like his take on things as well.
Okay. Any books or any other sources of information? Any events you've been to? People you follow?
Gosh.
Didn't mean to turn this into a quiz.
Yeah. I've been to a lot of events recently. Because I find that the in-person events are kind of they kind of died down after
sure.
Years ago I went to a bunch and that was fun. And it's good to see people in person. I just think there's less of that going on. But yeah, and then communicating with people directly one-on-one, there's just All
right. So you in your practice, you emphasize collaboration and leading distributed teams. So what, from Tom Holt's perspective, what are some effective strategies for building high performing remote teams and maintaining a strong sense of collaboration and shared purpose?
So, okay. I think the biggest thing that we have to do with remote teams, and the reason why remote teams are different from co-located teams, is communication. The communication in a co-located team is can be, doesn't have to be, but it can be more natural and less friction. So in a distributed team, that communication is more intentional. So anything I can do that reduces the friction of initiating a conversation, like whether that's an instant messaging tool like Slack or Teams or what have you, or if it's a video conferencing tool that everybody's got access to, right? So it's not just a few special people that can fire up a video conference, but anybody on the team can fire one up. You want to make that as simple and easy as possible, because once again, all those communication lines, if you cut any of those communication lines, now what you've done, for example, I worked with a team a while back where all of the communication came through a single person, right? So there was a remote team, and then that remote team all reported to this team leader, and that team leader did all the communication with the US based stakeholders and team. Well, that was a problem. It was a big bottleneck. There was a couple of things wrong with it, right? One is it took longer. So they had to tell him, and he had to tell us, and then we told him, and he told them, right? So that each hop takes a little bit longer. So the feedback loop is longer. Sorry, feedback loop is longer. And also you have the game of, we're all familiar with the game of telephone, right? Every time you communicate to somebody else and then they re-communicate that to a different person, then there's a loss of data. There's noise gets introduced into the system. And so in that case, what we did was we said, okay, this remote team, now they were in a wildly different time zone, right? They're like 10 and a half hours away. So there was no overlap. We said, okay, at least once a week, we want everybody to get together. We're going to do it in a time that's kind of inconvenient for everybody. And we want everybody to be on the call. We want cameras on, and we want to see you, and we want you to be asking questions. We want you to, and we don't want the team leader, if somebody from one of the stakeholders asks a question, we don't want the team leader to answer. We want the individual that worked on the work item, whatever it was, to answer. Now, this was a little awkward at first because it was culturally different for them. They were not used to that. They were used to, a more hierarchical system. But it doubled throughput. It was profoundly different. Once we instituted this, quality went up, and the speed of development went up.
So am I correct in hearing that you can make a very strong case for distributed teams potentially being more effective than co-located teams because of the intentionality of communication and the way you communicate can sometimes reduce the amount of interference that goes on in teams there. The reason I'm asking you this is because, the standard thought is like, oh, co-location is always the best. But in order to find hyper specialized skills at cost effective pricing and other benefits of offshore, you need to just deal with it. It's going to reduce the effectiveness because people aren't, right there in the same room.
So, this goes to something I've been thinking a lot about lately because, for example, Amazon just did their return to office 5 days a week, right? And this is this is not for an outsourced team. This is for their actual employees. But I think the same principles hold. And my opinion is the reason why they did that. You could say it was backdoor layoffs or whatever, but I think the real reason they did it is because they did not know how to manage a remote workforce. And so I agree with you. I think your ability to to have an effective team is at least as good with a remote workforce if you manage it correctly. You can just like anything else, you can manage it poorly and have bad results. Okay, it's not a guarantee of better results, but I think, yeah, like you said, that you can reduce the level of noise, and you can have a very, very effective team remotely.
Great. Yeah, that's. I'd like to continue the evolution of thought leadership and practice leadership around that, because I think there's people just jump to the conclusions that co-location is better, and that's not necessarily the case. But let me just move on here. So I'd like to understand how you approach coaching and mentoring engineering managers, and how you help develop and enhance their skills to foster such a collaborative environment.
Okay, so the thing about most engineering managers, almost all, I don't know if I've run into any that didn't follow this path. The way that they got into engineering management, and this is the same for me, is that they were good developers.
Sure,
they were good engineers, and they understood the technical things well. They did a good job with the technical things, and so somebody came along and said, "Hey, I'd like for you to lead a group of people." And those skills are so different.
Yeah.
Writing really good code.
Principle? I mean, it's not the Conway principle, but it's, you continue to.
Peter principle.
Is it the Peter principle?
Yeah. Well, let's see. The Peter principle may be the pathological
you exceed
version
until you reach your level of incompetence or something.
Yes. Your highest level of incompetence, right? Yeah. Until you can't do until you can't do the job anymore, and then you stay there. So what I like to do, what I find is generally the most important thing that new engineering managers, or even engineering managers are moving from one level to another, the thing that they're missing is not the technical skills. The technical skills become less critical as you go up. I mean, by the time you're managing managers, the amount of time that you should be spending writing code is essentially zero. Right. There are people with different feelings on that, but that's my feeling. So then what should you be doing, and what should you have skills at? Well, you should have skills in what is the process? How is this all working? And then how do I manage? What are the soft skills that are necessary in order to make sure that, first, when you're your first level manager, how do I make sure that my team or my teams have everything that they need, and that they are communicating back and forth, and that there is a sense of safety and trust within this team? How do I model that for them? How do I make sure that that's happening in the team? Because once again, not to bring up something too academic, but Google did their Aristotle project a few years back. And the Aristotle project, they were trying to figure out what the most effective teams were. And when they did that, they came up with 5 things. And I won't mention 5. You can go look them up, Aristotle, Google. But the most important thing is something they called psychological safety. And psychological safety in the team means that anybody on the team can feel it's okay to disagree, and it will not affect their status in the team. And so one way to call that is just trust, right? Do you trust these other people you're working with? Do you believe that if you say something, and whether it's right or wrong, if it disagrees with what somebody else on the team thinks, that you could have a disagreement about the subject and not disagree with the person? And so that's the most important thing, is like, how do you encourage that kind of culture, that kind of environment within the team? That's the first and most important thing that I try to teach any engineering manager. And there's no cookie cutter to that, right? You have to understand the goal, and then there's some techniques to do that. And, years ago in my career, when I first got started, and we had some, lack of trust, I posted the retrospective prime directive up in. I made a giant board and posted it up in the room and said, "Look at this." And it's a long thing. Somebody can go look that up too. But essentially, it all boils down to assume best intentions, right? When you're talking to your colleague who's on the QA team and you are the front end developer and they're saying, I found this bug, you do not immediately assume that they are attacking you. Like, you assume best intentions. They want good things. They want good things for the user, right? Vice versa. This developer goes, I don't think that actually is a bug. He has to, the QA person has to assume best intentions. And that's a important part of that. But I mean, the trust thing is just super important.
So on that topic, then, what kind of advice would you give to aspiring software leaders who are looking to make a significant impact, I would say, on their organizations and teams?
Oh gosh, well,
that's a big one.
On top of that, I mean, obviously, lean into those soft skills. Don't think that your job is to be smarter than everybody else in the room, because at some point, you will not have more technical understanding. I mean, when you first get promoted, you probably are the most technically proficient person in the room, okay? Because that's why you got promoted. But at some point, you won't be, and you don't want to be. You want the team to be more technically proficient than you are. You want, there's an old saying I used to have when I walk in, I was like, listen, if I'm the smartest person in the room, I've hired the wrong people, okay? And, so there's a certain level of humility and confidence that goes into that. Humility to say, it's okay if I don't know more technical stuff than you do. Confidence to say, my value is still there. Even if I, am not going to overrule your technical decision, because it's better than what I would have chosen. So I think
it's also okay. I'd like to get your perspective on this. It's also okay to say, hey, things could be done differently.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm not saying you abdicate your decisions, at all. But what I am saying is, that's not your main value at this point.
That's right.
Asking really good questions. And I think, the technical background you bring into a position like this, helps you to do that. So anyway, yeah, absolutely. I think the soft skills are the things that, most engineering managers need to lean into, because their natural tendency is going to want to be to lean into things that they are already good at, which is the technical things.
I would assume that a lot of time must be spent in having really hard self-assessment and leadership assessment of potential future leaders as to whether they should continue on with some different aspect of technical leadership versus people leadership, because some people may feel or envision, or maybe their significant other expects them to evolve to a position of potentially incompetence. I mean, for example, at Accelerance, we use these 6 types of working genius, and what it basically says is you're good in two types, and you're okay in 2 types, and 2 other types essentially drain both energy and happiness from you, even though you may think you want to, you may be able to do the job, but it doesn't bring you fulfillment and happiness and energy, and it doesn't behoove the company you work for or yourself in different ways. So there's got to be a lot of self-assessment and leadership guidance as to.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's why, in a lot of organizations, there's a technical ladder, but I think whatever you want to call it, there needs to be a way for someone to progress in their career, to excel, and not take on people leadership responsibilities if that's not something that gives them life, so to speak. That they're not enthusiastic about it. They don't everybody needs to get along with people, so I guess there's that, but maybe dealing with those kinds of issues isn't what you want.
I constantly see a lot of backtracking of professionals that have spent too long in positions of leadership in which they ultimately get burned out, and they're seeking the redefinition of what fulfills them and makes them happy.
Absolutely. And so, one of two things happens, right? Either they are just overwhelmed with, or, let's say they are able to do it, but it drains them, like you said. Like, well, then that's not good for them. And it's actually not good for the organization either, because, put somebody in that position that relishes it and that is, has an orientation towards that kind of work, and let this person do what they're good at. I mean, I think that's just really important leadership skills for whoever's managing the manager in that case, or the staff engineer, or whoever they happen to be.
There's one more thing maybe we should consider as leaders is that as you climb the technical ladder, as you mentioned earlier, it's not necessarily that you're capable of coming up with more and more complex solutions. In fact, simple solutions to me are much better than complex solutions, for one thing. But it's maybe also the ability to see things that others do not see, and being able to convey those things in a simple manner and implement them in a simple manner, right? So as I said, complex things don't rarely work, by the way. But in the end, that's the way I would see the technical ladder, more from can I do things more in a simpler manner, not simplistic, but in a simpler manner? Can I see things others don't see?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And one of the things I think about when I think about our industry, software, right? We're building software. The biggest, so I said communication is big, but actually the biggest thing is the complexity of what we're dealing with. It is overwhelming complexity, and we manage that in so many different ways. But one of the goals of any technical person should be to fight against introducing additional unnecessary complexity into the system, because the system is already so complex that you can't completely understand it. There's no one person that understands any one program and all the things that go into it at this point. I was going to say Microsoft Windows, but think of the simplest program, and there's no one person that understands all the things that go into, all the way down to like, what's the instruction set that goes into the microprocessor that makes that work. So there's a very complex system. We have a lot of things that we do to try to componentize, to containerize that complexity. It's like I talked about earlier, like, hey, how do we handle the complexity of a large system? Well, we make sure that these components are loosely coupled with one another, right? So that we can treat this one component over here as kind of a black box. We hope we can, so that we can say, if I put this input, I will get this output. And something happens inside that box. We don't know all the things that happen inside that box. We don't need to know. Somebody knows, not this team, the team that's using it. So yeah, absolutely. Like decreasing complexity. I've seen some really, really smart developers that have created really, really complicated code that nobody else could understand. And the problem with that is, A, that nobody else could understand it. And B, 2 years later, they couldn't understand it either because it was too stale.
That's
so
right.
Decreasing complexity is a goal.
Tom, I have a couple of sort of future-facing questions, and that is, what advice do you give to organizations that are, clearly, I think every organization today is struggling with the constant change of their competitive landscape and the world around them. But what sort of advice would you give to organizations around the evolution of software development, especially in terms of like remote teams and distributed teams? How do you get them to lean into this seismic shift?
Well, okay. So number one, I think remote teams are the future. We before the pandemic, we saw an increase, a linear increase year over year in the number of people that were working remotely and that were utilizing distributed and remote teams. So, and then the pandemic came along and it was a big step function, right? And a lot of people weren't ready for that. And so now we're seeing some retrenching from that, right? But I think long term, those companies that are pulling back, that may work for them in the short term. I think long term, it is the future. Everyone's going to essentially be working remotely, at least in this industry. I mean, there's some things that you can't do. There's other industries you can't work remotely in. Manufacturing. You can develop software remotely in manufacturing, but you can't actually, put things together remotely.
But the reality is 85% of software developers live outside the U.S. Tools and processes keep getting better. Cultural misalignment continues to be reduced based on the democratization of information and cultures. Cultures don't have borders. Well, I mean, a little bit borders, but less and less over time, right? I mean, so it's inevitable, correct?
Yeah, and it's going to happen. I mean, and if you don't go with the trend, then you're going to be behind. I just absolutely. It's a global marketplace for this now, and if you try to pretend like it isn't, then that's a organizational disadvantage for you.
Sure. So. You lay out the facts. You insert a little bit of rational drowning, but in a positive way to organizations that need to evolve or be affected by evolution around them that affects them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's going to be table stakes at some point to have a global team.
Yeah. So what do you see as the role of software leaders evolving over the next few years as far as what kind of skills or qualities will be essential for their success?
Well, okay. So I've talked a lot about soft skills, so I'm going to go with something else because I think that's really important. I think and when I've been talking about soft skills during this podcast, it's been a lot about like understanding the people on your team and developing a good relationship with them and making sure that they have a good relationship with each other and all those sorts of things. I think the other side of that is understanding your users and stakeholders. I think that is, and understanding the problems that you are solving. As we see, as tools get more and more sophisticated, I've been, I remember writing in assembly language. And when I was writing in assembly language, it was, what can you get the computer to do? Now you can pretty much get the computer to do anything. It's what do you want it to do? And understanding what the problem is and what problem you're trying to solve becomes more and more important as the tools become more sophisticated and more able to, open the door to whatever it is that you want them to do. So we need to figure out what it is we want to do. And, I think that's going to be the growth area for software leaders going forward. It's making sure that you're solving a problem that the users need solved, and you're solving it in a way that brings delight to them.
Well, thank you for joining us today, Tom. Your expertise in agile transformation, remote team leadership, and scaling software development processes was incredibly valuable. To our listeners, we hope you enjoyed the episode of Software Without Borders. If you're interested in learning more about agile methodologies, remote team optimization, or the latest trends in software development, be sure to subscribe to our show and leave only a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platform.